Welcome back to part 11, where we build projectiles. But not just any projectiles. Fully replicated, data-driven, and utilizing gas components. Today we're introducing a very useful feature in gas, which is targeting. And we'll see how we use gas's targeting setup to get the direction of our projectiles. This part builds upon everything we've learned so far, so it will reinforce the knowledge of all the previous lessons. Let's jump in and start building our first ability that actually shoots something. So, how exactly does the projectile ability work? Well, in a nutshell, when a player presses a button, we play an animation, and when the animation reaches a certain point, then we spawn a separate projectile actor that I'm going to be using this visual effect for. But we need to spawn that actor at a specific location and towards a specific direction. All right, so we need to identify both these. And then, of course, there are visual effects, sound effects using GameplayCues, and damage using gameplay effects like we've been doing. But we need to coordinate all these together between the weapon, the projectile, the animation, and the gameplay ability. So let's first start by creating our projectile actor. So I'm going to first start by creating a new folder called Projectiles right here in my content browser. And inside it, I'm going to add my first base projectile. So it's a blueprint class of type actor, and let's call it BP projectile base. And let's open it up. So what does a projectile have in terms of components? Well, it has a sphere collision because we are going to do sphere-based projectiles. So let's call this our sphere collision. And it's very important when doing projectiles that the collision object itself is the root. So drag and drop this on the default scene root to make the new root. And then just so we know the projectile direction, we're going to add an arrow. This arrow is just for visibility in the editor, it doesn't show up in the game. And then most importantly, it has a projectile movement component. All right. So I'm going to keep the sphere radius now for the base projectile the same size, and for the projectile movement component, I'm going to override some values. So rotation follows velocity. This just updates the rotation on every tick to make sure it's following the velocity that we set. And the gravity scale, I'm going to turn it to 0 because I don't want gravity on my projectiles. And then also one important option called auto activate. I'm going to turn this to false because I want to activate my projectile manually. So we're going to set some values and then say activate. So I don't want it to automatically activate when the projectile class is spawned. All right, and finally for my sphere collision, the collision settings are very important. Here is where you define how you want your projectile to behave, right? I'm going to do one thing. I'm going to have it block world static and world dynamic and overlap with everything else. The reason I'm doing this is because I'm going to detect a block, which I will know it's going to be a world static or world dynamic, then I'm going to destroy the projectile without trying to do damage because I can't damage a world object. But if I overlap anything else, then I'm going to check what am I overlapping and then decide to do damage or not. You'll see in a bit, but these are the collision settings I'm going for. Maybe you want to create your own object type for, like create a projectile object channel so you can do projectiles ignore each other and things like that. But for now, we're keeping it simpler. And finally, as always, we're doing multiplayer. So go to our class defaults and search for replicate or replication. There are very important options here. So the replicates, this has to be turned on, and replicate movement as well has to be turned on. This is because we are going to spawn the projectile only on the server and then have the server replicate it to all connected clients. Great. So now our components are ready and our default values are set. Now in the event graph, well, first we need two variables. We need a speed variable, which is going to be a float to know the projectile speed, and make it instance editable and expose on spawn. So this is very important because we're going to pass it when we spawn this class. And another one, call it target location, which is a vector. So where are we spawning this projectile towards? And this is also editable expose on spawn. And let's give them categories. So let's call these the projectile settings category. And let's put both of them in this category. Excellent. So we now have speed and location, which means that as soon as we start, we can set our projectile movement's velocity. So you get your projectile movement component and say set velocity. And velocity is direction times magnitude. So we first need to get the direction that we're going towards. So we get our current actor's location. So this is the projectile's location. And say get unit direction. So from the projectile's location to the target location, this is our direction. So multiply direction by magnitude. Magnitude is our speed. So direction, magnitude gives us velocity. And then as soon as we set our velocity, then we can activate our projectile movement component. Great. So now we need to detect collisions. So on my sphere collision component here, I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom, and we're going to add two events. The on component begin overlap and on component hit. All right. So as I mentioned, as soon as we hit something, we only hit world static and world dynamic. So as soon as we hit something, I'm just going to destroy the actor. And that's it. Not going to do anything else. But when we overlap, here is when we want to check, who am I overlapping? Am I overlapping, maybe you have teams. Am I overlapping someone in the same team? Then just go through them. Am I overlapping myself, for example? Then I don't want to damage myself. So that's very important. We're going to do this check first things. So get the other actor. And if the actor is not equal to the instigator, so the instigator is the pawn that spawned this projectile, and we need to pass it when we spawn it, by the way. So if the actor I'm overlapping now is not myself, then maybe I do damage and destroy the actor and so on. But if not, then I will just continue going normally. Here, again, like I said, maybe you want to add checks. Who are you overlapping with to ignore or not ignore them? But for now, if I overlap anything, let's say I destroy the actor. But of course, before destroying the actor, we want to do damage. So I'm going to get this actor that I'm overlapping with and get their ability system component. So maybe they don't have an ability system component. Maybe here also you don't want to destroy them. So again, always up to you. So I'm going to check if it's valid. And if we do have a valid ability system component, then I will, as we always do, apply gameplay effect spec to self. Great. So the projectile is responsible for applying the damage. Now, if they don't have a projectile, if they don't have an ability system component, maybe you also want to destroy, maybe you don't, I don't know, up to you, I'm going to destroy. But now we apply damage, we need a spec handle. This spec handle will be a variable as well, because the projectile doesn't know what kind of damage to do, but we'll pass it in from the ability. So call this the effect spec handle and put it in a category, let's call it gameplay effects. Perfect. Great, and that is it for right now, at least for our base projectile. Now we want to create a specific child of this projectile that we're going to add the visual effect to, because every child can have different visual effects or settings. So create a child. I'm going to call this the BP projectile green fire. Okay, and this is the name. I'm just going to open it up and I'm just going to add one thing under the sphere here, which is a Niagara particle system. And let's call this the projectile VFX. And this is the effects that I showed you, this projectile here. And maybe we can make the sphere slightly bigger. Yeah, something like that. All right, and this is what it looks like in the world. This is my projectile. Now we have our projectile actor. We just need to spawn it. So I'm going to head to my abilities, gameplay ability system, and create my shoot projectile ability. Now, like we did with the base melee attack, we're going to have also a base projectile ability. But first, we're going to create just this projectile, this specific one, and then see how we're going to make it a base, just like we did as well with the melee attack. So, new blueprint of type Nexus gameplay ability. Remember, this is our gameplay ability class, and call it GA shoot projectile underscore base. So we're going to name it base for now, and then we're going to extend it later. So I'm going to go a bit fast in the things that we've done before. So for example, adding a tag, this will just be called the gameplay ability shoot projectile. It's going to be instance per actor, and we are going to show it in the abilities bar. And I showed you in the beginning that this is the animation montage that we'll be using. So we just need to play this animation as soon as the ability starts. So as always, play montage and wait. So this is the node we want. And the montage itself is this projectile. And we're going to make it a variable. So shoot, this is the shoot montage. All right, because this is the base class, so in the child we can override this variable. And we'll just end the ability on completed, on interrupted, on canceled, and allow interrupt after blend out. So right now, this is just our ability. It plays a montage, but doesn't do anything else. But before adding stuff to it, let's grant this ability to our player and see what it looks like. So as always, go to our staff weapon here, and under abilities to grant, we are just going to choose our shoot projectile base. And then I'm going to add an input for it. You've seen me do this multiple times, so I'm just going to do it quickly. No need to bore you with it. And I just mapped it to the left mouse button. All right, and back in my Nexus player, we're just going to add the input action as well. IA shoot projectile that triggers this ability. So this is what we've done multiple times before, nothing new here. So now if I play and I equip my staff, here I see the ability in the abilities bar, and if I left click, it plays the montage. Perfect. So now we just want to spawn our projectile here in a specific direction. So how do we get that? What is the direction that we're going to spawn the projectile in? Well, usually you want to spawn it in the direction where the camera is facing, so right to the center of the camera. But right now, my player is standing in the center of the camera, so I'm always going to be aiming at my player's back. So we're going to shift our player to the left a bit, or move our camera to the right a bit, and see how GameplayAbility systems do targeting. Alright, so as I mentioned, we need clear line of sight to the center of the screen. And the proper way to do it is like this, to have each weapon define its own camera settings and have a crosshair widget in the center. So the staff shifts the camera to the right a bit, and when you're not equipping it, the camera's back. So this is going to be part of the extended tutorial I have for Patreon members, where we do this camera settings and the crosshair, and you have all this additional functionality. But it's not really related to gas, so for this tutorial we're going to go simple, and we're just going to offset. So go on the camera's boom here, we're going to offset the socket on the Y by 90 and on the Z by 40, so that we are always looking over the shoulder, regardless of what weapon we have. And that way we have clear line of sight to the center at all times. Alright, but if you do want the extended tutorial and you want to learn how we're doing the camera settings per weapon, like this, then you can check it out on my Patreon. But for now, let's just see how targeting works in the GameplayAbility system. So usually I would do a line trace from the center of the camera and from the weapon and see what it hits, and that will be my location. Luckily, in the GameplayAbility system, so let me go back to my ability here, it comes with a lot of very handy targeting methods. So let me show you one of them. I'm going to say wait for target data. Okay? Wait for target data takes a GameplayAbility target actor class. And there are a few of them that are already built for us, and later on we are going to create our own targeting classes. But for now, I just want to do a single line trace target. And it then gives you a bunch of options here. The main option that we're interested in is the start location. And you can pull off and say, make a target location info from owner actor. So this will get the owner, get their location, and set that as the start location. The next thing we're interested in is the confirmation type. Do you start targeting and get a target instantly? That's what instant does. Or do you wait for the user to confirm by pressing a button or something? I'm going to make it user confirmed and turn on debug just for now so that you see what it looks like. But we're not going to do user confirmation for this one. We're going to do instant. But let me just do this now and then play the montage, and look, you see this line trace that we're drawing? This is our target data. And anything it hits, it will give us the location of. And it does it from the actor's location. So this is very handy. Of course, if I turn it to instant, you won't see it because it just happens instantly, but the same thing happens. So this data is what we're going to use to get the location of our hit, which we will use as our spheres, as our projectile's target location. So we're going to do this on valid data. So as soon as we get valid data, which on instant means in the same frame here, I'm going to do spawn actor and use for gameplay task. Don't use the regular spawn actor from class. Use the gameplay task that is built for us within an ability. This is because it comes with some additional handy pins, like this one, spawn only on authority, which we're going to check, again because we're spawning the projectile only on the server, and we set it to replicate, so it will replicate the connected clients. So the class that we want to spawn is our green fire projectile here, and then it gives us the speed and target location. Actually, we should default the speed to something. Let's do it like 2000 is our default speed. And then back here in my ability, if I refresh, I should see my default speed. And the target location, where do we get the target location? Again, from data here, there is get endpoint. Okay, so get data endpoint. And this is our target location. So this is the endpoint of whatever that trace hit. Right. And then the instigator, again, like we said, this is really important to pass because we're ignoring it. And the instigator is a pawn, and it's ourselves. So right click and get avatar actor from actor info, but we need to cast it to a pawn first. And let's right click and make it a pure cast. Then we can just pass the pawn in here without execution pins. And finally, the spawn location. This is pretty important, and because where exactly do you spawn the projectile? We probably want it to spawn like at the tip of the staff. But right now, we don't have that location yet. I'm going to show it to you later. So right now, we're just going to spawn it in the player's current location. So get actor location. Great. So this will spawn the projectile, but it will spawn it instantly right after playing the montage. And let me show you. So let's play, and I'm going to left click. You see, there goes my projectile instantly. We don't want it to spawn instantly, right? But targeting is working. It's spawning in the direction my camera is facing. And it destroys correctly when it hits something world static or world dynamic. But there are a lot of things missing. We want it to spawn at a specific point in the animation, say around here. And there are some also visual and sound effects that are missing. So how do we first make it spawn at a specific point? Well, we're going to create a generic anim notify that sends any gameplay event tag that we set. And this we're going to be able to reuse for multiple events that we want to trigger from a montage. So let's see what that looks like. First, let's go to our anim notifies folder, and we're going to create a new blueprint class of type anim notify. This time, it's not anim notify state, it's just the regular anim notify because it happens once, it's not a state. And we're going to call this anim send gameplay events. All right. Then, as usual, override the get notified name. Let's give it a name, something like send gameplay event. And then override receive notify. So when this notify is triggered, we're going to also get our owner from our mesh component and then send gameplay event to actor. Great. Now we're not going to send a specific gameplay event here. We are going to make this a generic one. So the event tag, we're going to right click and promote to variable, call it the event tag, and make it instance editable. So now and yeah, return true at the end. You can also have the payload be a variable. Right now, I'm only interested in the tag, but you can have the whole payload be a variable. So how do we set this variable? Well, let's then go back to our montage here and first add this anim notify. So yeah, right around frame 24 here, I think is good. And I'm going to add my send gameplay event notify. And then I scroll here under details, and I see it under the default category. Maybe we also want to give it a category here. Let's call it event data. So now I can see it under the event data category. Here's my tag. So I'm just going to create a new event tag, and this event is just going to be called shoot projectile. All right. So now we have a reusable anim notify that we can use to send any gameplay event we want. Back in my ability here, so instead of immediately after playing the montage, we wait for target data. Let's instead move all of this here and first wait for the gameplay event. the gameplay event with the name shoot projectile. And when we receive this event, then we continue to do the targeting and the spawning. All right, so now if I play, boom, here's my projectile spawning at right time. Excellent. And let's also test it in multiplayer to make sure that it's working. So on the server, we tested it. Here's our projectile and the client sees it. And on the client here, the client sees it and the server sees it. Excellent. Of course, the projectile doesn't do damage yet. So if I attack this guy, it's hitting him, but it's not doing damage. That's, of course, because we didn't pass in our gameplay effect. So let's do that next. So back here in my GameplayAbility, we didn't make it instance editable, did we? Go to my projectile base. Yeah, this effect spec handle should be instance editable and expose on spawn. And then when I go back to my projectile and refresh, now I have the effect spec handle that I should be able to pass. So we're going to make it as always like we do and pass in our instant damage gameplay effect spec. So make outgoing spec and choose our damage instance. But before, let's set by caller, assign tag set by caller, so that we set the damage value. As always, we've done this multiple times before, so you should be fairly familiar with how this works now. And that will be the effect that we pass. So data.damage and the magnitude, let's say -50. Great. Of course, this is also going to be a base ability, so you might want to make all these things variable. So the speed should be a variable, this gameplay effect class should be a variable, and the magnitude should be a variable. I'm not going to bore you by creating them one by one, so I'm just going to do them all once off camera. All right, I've created variables for my damage effect class, my projectile class, my damage magnitude, and my projectile speed. Very important, the projectile class should be of type BP projectile base. If you just make it of type actor, then you won't get the speed and target like all these variables here. So it's very important to choose the right class. So now if I test, I should be able to do damage. So now I'm going to hit this guy. Boom, and excellent. Took 50 damage, hit them again, and they are at 0 health. And the client can also damage the server. There you go. There you go. Perfect. Now I want to add gameplay cues for when we spawn the projectile to play a sound, and when it hits something to play a hit impact. So there are multiple ways to do this. We're going to be doing it through gameplay cues, but where do we execute these gameplay cues? Well, previously we executed it in the gameplay ability, but the gameplay ability doesn't know when the projectile hits something. That is in the projectile class itself. So we're going to create 2 cues and then execute them from the projectile class. You can do a mix. Something's executed in the ability, something's executed in the class itself. Doesn't matter that much, but for my use case, I'm going to do them all in the projectile class. And I'm going to show you one of the main differences that will dictate where you might want to put your gameplay cue. But first, let's create our gameplay cue. So I have some sounds here. So I'm going to play this projectile spawn sound as soon as the projectile spawns. And that's going to be a simple gameplay cue that just plays a sound. Maybe for just playing a sound, a whole gameplay cue might not be beneficial, but we're going to do it this way because maybe we want to add more to it in the future. Like maybe it doesn't just play a sound, it plays an effect or something, I don't know. But for now, I'm just going to show you how it looks like. Go to our gameplay cues folder, create a new blueprint class of type gameplay cue, and bursts, because it's just something you burst once. So we're going to call this the projectile spawn _ green fire, because it's going to be this specific sound for this specific projectile. So open it up, close it, and open it again to open in data only view. Let's first start by adding the gameplay cue tag, which will be gameplay cue projectile spawn .green fire. And then we only want a single sound to play, so under burst sounds here, click plus, and we're going to add our projectile spawn sound. Great. So we have a gameplay queue for spawning the projectile. Now let's create another one. So create new blueprint class, gameplay queue, burst as well for the impact. So GC projectile impact green fire. Close it, open it again, and give it a name, gameplay queue projectile impact green fire. Now you might want to have different impacts, like impact hit player, hit wall, hit whatever. For now, again, we're being simple, just hit something. All right, so when it hits something, I also want to play a sound. So under burst sounds here, I have this impact void sound. And we are then going to also add an impact effect. So under burst particles here, let's add the Niagara system for projectile impact. And this is a Niagara system I have that looks like this. All right. So this will spawn at a specific location, okay? So it's really important when we execute these gameplay queues, we pass in a location for them so they know where to spawn them. But let's see how we're going to execute them. So in our projectile base ability here, we are going to, as soon as we activate, we are going to execute the projectile spawn gameplay queue. So search for execute gameplay queue on actor. Now, there's something very important to know about this node, and I'm going to show it to you here. It says this node, if the actor has an ability system component, it will fire only on the authority and be replicated. But if the actor does not have an ability system component, then it will only be fired locally. Okay? This doesn't matter much for this projectile because it's replicated. So we are going to spawn it on the projectile class itself. Okay, so that means that it's going to be spawned on the projectile locally, but because it's replicated, every player will have this effect spawn on their own local machine. And the gameplay queue is our projectile spawn.greenfire. So the parameters here, this is where you pass a location. So say make queue parameters. And there's going to be a ton of parameters. We only care about the location here, which will be our get actor location. And we don't care about all the other ones. So now we have our spawn gameplay queue, but remember this is the base projectile. So we want this to be configured for every child. So this will be a variable, and we're going to call this the gameplay queue spawn. And let's put it in a gameplay queues category. So it defaults to the green fire, but every child can set their own. And we probably also want to make it a instance editable and expose on spawn. Excellent. Now for our impact. So we do impact in two places here, on hit and on overlap. But in both of them, we just destroy the actor. So what we're going to do is override, well, extend the destroy event. So search for event destroyed. So this is right before the actor is destroyed. What do we want to do? Well, we want to execute this as well. So we're going to do the same thing we did here, but instead of this, we want to choose our green fire impact. And let's also make it a variable and call it the gameplay queue impact. Put it in the same category, instance editable, expose on spawn. Great. Now let's see if this works. So I'm going to do, there's a sound and there's an impact. Amazing. And it works on both client and server. Let's see if the client sees their own impact and sound. Yep. Excellent. Oh, I forgot to mention something really important for replication. You see how the projectile sometimes looks a bit janky on the client? Yeah, like right now. This is because the target location and speed on the server are different than on the client. So there is constantly error correction. And the reason is very simple. It's because we didn't replicate the speed and target location. These should both be set to replicated so that the client always has the updated values. And this should fix our jankiness on the client. Much better. So now it is very smooth. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is the spawn location. So right now in our ability, we just spawn the projectile in the actor's location, so from the root position of the actor. We don't want that. We want the spawn point, like we said here, to be at the tip of the staff. So we want the projectile to spawn right here. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to define a spawn location on each weapon, so that every weapon can say this is where you spawn something if you need to. So let's go to our BP weapon base, and let's create a new function here. I'm going to call it get spawn point. All right, and it just returns a location, which is of type vector. So where is it going to get this location from? Well, just like we did with our trace start and trace end, let's also add a new scene component, so scene component, and let's call it spawn point. And then the get spawn point, let's actually call it get spawn point location. And the get spawn point location just gets the spawn point and gets the world location from it and passes that in. Now every child can define their own spawn point. So for example, I can now go here to my staff, and I will move my spawn point to right about here. Okay? And I don't have to change anything else. I don't have to override the get spawn point function. Now, if you want weapons not to have spawn points, then you do override the spawn point location and then just give a 0 value. So how are we going to use that in our ability? So let's go to our shoot projectile ability. So we're not going to get this actor location anymore. Let's delete that. And instead, let's create a function actually for this. Let's call it get spawn location. All right, and again, returns the location vector. And what it's going to do is it's going to get it from the weapon. So we need to get our weapon from our weapons manager. So let's first get our avatar actor from actor info, and get component by class like we did before, and check for our weapons manager. So we need to make sure that it is valid. And if it is valid, we're going to continue and return something. But if it's not valid, let's default to the get actor's location as well. So this get avatar actor info, get actor location, that will always be our default. So if it's not valid, return that. All right, so if it is valid, then what do we want to do? Well, we want to get our equipped weapon because that's what has the spawn location. But first, convert to a validated get, because if it is not valid, then we'll fall back to this as well. Excellent. So if it is valid, what do we want to return? Well, we want to get our spawn point location. But the spawn point location maybe is not valid. So also let's check that if it is not equal 0. So if it is not equal 0, great, then we can return it. And if it is equal 0, you guessed it, fall back. Let me just clean this up a bit. All right. And this is our get spawn point location function, which we can now call right here. Get spawn point location, and that will be the location. All right, now let's test it and see if it works. I'm going to do it on the server, but also have the client look at it to see what it looks like. And I'm going to do it in slow motion and make sure that it's coming out of the right point. Perfect. Nice. All right, so now we have the spawn location and we have impact sounds and effects. All right, now I made a mistake that I want to fix now, and that's in our base projectile. When we apply damage, we don't check if we're on the server. That means we apply damage both on the server and the client. That's not the right way to do it. Generally, you only want damage to be applied on the server. Even though in our projectile, when we spawned it, we said spawn only on authority. That means that we're initiating the spawn of the projectile on the server. but the projectile is replicated. That means the server creates a copy on every client. So if I add a print statement here, let me show you just after applying damage, and I'm on the server and I damage someone, you see it printed hello on both the server and the client. And same thing for the client. If I damage someone, prints hello both on the server and the client. That's because there exists a copy of this projectile on both the server and the client. So we need to make sure that we're only applying damage if we have authority. All right, so I'm going to do it just here. Do a switch has authority. And if we do have authority, then we're going to apply damage. And if we don't, let's destroy the actor. All right, so now we should only, so if I do a print here, now we should only see a print once from the server. Perfect. And here as well, print once on the server. Beautiful. Now, another mistake that I also want to change, which is this. So we made the GameplayCue spawn and GameplayCue impact both instance editable here on our base projectile. Actually, I realized you might not want to be able to override the impacts and the spawn sounds for every instance. You probably only want the child to be able to override these. So I'm not going to make them instance editable and expose on spawn because I don't want to see them here. That means that, did I change both? Yeah, this one as well. That means that when we create a child of this, so we do have this child here, this green fire, that means I can override them here. But that means it's overridable only within the class. So for every class, we retain the same impact effect and spawn sounds. And that's a better design. You have made it to the end of the video, and we finally have configurable, reusable, multiplayer-ready projectiles. And if most of what we discussed here today makes sense to you, then you have an excellent grasp of the GameplayAbility system so far. And if not, don't worry, practice makes perfect, and the more abilities we create, the more it will start to make sense. And we're still going to make a lot more. And as I mentioned earlier in the video, there is an extended version of this tutorial where I show you how to dynamically and smoothly change the camera settings based on the equipped weapon, and add a crosshair that reacts to the player's movement speed. So if you want to learn how to do that and support me, check out my Patreon. Now, next up in part 12, I want to talk about gameplay tags and how they make abilities interact with each other. For example, if you are dashing, we don't want you to be able to shoot a projectile. Or if you are in the middle of a combo attack and then you dash, well, first cancel the combo attack. So some abilities have priority over others, some abilities block others, some abilities cancel others. And all that is done through gameplay tags. And we're going to see exactly how to do that in part 12. So I hope to see you there, and thank you for watching.